I know he was hard on me, Your Honor, but he's not a bad man. He doesn't deserve this.
Stop the trial. He's innocent. Naomi's voice cut through the hushed courtroom like a blade. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The reporters' pens mid-scratch, the jurors' heads turning in unison, the judge's gavel suspended above the block. And then, chaos. "Order!" the judge barked, slamming his gavel so hard it cracked the wood beneath. Reporters surged to their feet, cameras flashing. Lawyers twisted in their seats, confused and irritated. Alexander Harrington, the billionaire heir whose trial had consumed the nation for weeks, turned slowly in his chair. His sharp blue eyes that had always glared at her with contempt, fixed now on Naomi with disbelief. She stood trembling at the back of the courtroom, her maid's uniform stark against the polished mahogany benches. Her hands clenched together, her back straight despite the heat of 100 stares. Naomi's voice quavered, but she didn't sit down. "Mr. Harrington didn't steal that money," she said, forcing each word past the hammering of her chest. I was there the night it happened. I saw what really went on." The courtroom erupted. "Who even is she?" sneered the prosecution attorney, a man with slick hair and a smug smile. "A maid? A servant? This is absurd. Your Honor, this outburst should be stricken." But Alexander's lawyer, a weary man in a rumpled suit, rose quickly. "Wait, let her speak." Naomi swallowed hard. Her eyes darted to Alexander, who now leaned forward, his expression unreadable. All she could see in his face was the memory of every time he had dismissed her, every time he snapped, "Bring it quicker!" or muttered, "Can't you do anything right?" She remembered the sting of being invisible. And yet, here she was, risking everything. The judge's gaze was sharp. "Miss, state your name and your relation to the defendant." Her voice cracked only slightly. "Naomi Bennett. I work as a maid at the Harrington estate." A ripple of cruel laughter slid through the courtroom. A maid defending a billionaire. The story wrote itself for the journalists already scribbling. Alexander finally spoke, his voice low but cutting through the noise. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't know what she's talking about." Naomi flinched at the sharpness in his tone. Her cheeks burned. Still, she refused to back down. "No," she said firmly. "I do know. I saw Richard Alden in your study that night. He was the one who—" "Enough!" Alexander slammed his palm onto the table, his anger exploding. "Don't you dare drag his name into this. Richard has been loyal to my family for years. You think you, a maid, can come in here and save me?" His laugh was bitter, harsh. "Pathetic." The humiliation stung like a whip. Naomi's throat tightened, but she stood tall. The judge, frowning, ordered the court into recess. As the crowd dispersed into murmurs and gossip, Naomi remained rooted in place, her legs trembling beneath her uniform. Alexander rose, towering over her with his tailored suit and sculpted arrogance. He leaned in, his voice a hiss, meant only for her. "You've already made me look like a fool in front of everyone. Don't think for a second I'll let you ruin what little chance I have left." Naomi's dark eyes lifted to his. For once, she did not bow her head. "You don't have a chance without the truth." And then she walked past him, her back straight, though her hands shook violently as she pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The cameras swiveled to capture her retreat, the maid who dared to speak. Inside the courtroom, Alexander Harrington sank into his seat again, jaw tight, chest heaving. For the first time, doubt pierced through his pride. And far away, in a penthouse office across the city, Richard Alden sat watching the broadcast on a wall-sized screen. His lies. P.S. curved into a thin smile. "A maid thinks she can undo me?" he muttered, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Let her try." The battle had only just begun. The next morning, the courthouse steps were a battlefield. Reporters swarmed in a frenzy, microphones shoved forward, cameras flashing as Naomi pushed through the crowd. "Miss Bennett, why did you defend Mr. Harrington?" one shouted. "Are you being paid to lie?" another demanded. A woman with too much eyeliner sneered. "What makes you think anyone will believe a maid?" Naomi hugged her coat tighter, her head high though her stomach twisted. Each question was a dart, but she refused to flinch. She had walked through life being unseen. Now, under the blinding lights, her dignity was her only shield. Inside the courthouse lobby, Alexander stood with his lawyers, his jaw sharp as stone. He looked immaculate, tailored navy suit, silk tie, gold cufflinks, but his eyes burned with irritation. He spotted Naomi across the room and strode toward her with clipped steps. "Do you enjoy this?" he snapped, his voice low but venomous. "Do you enjoy parading around like some savior? You've turned this trial into a circus." Naomi steadied her breath. "I don't care about the circus, Mr. Harrington. I care about the truth." Alexander's laugh was cold. "Truth? People don't want truth. They want blood. And thanks to you, they smell mine." His blue eyes cut into her. "Go back to scrubbing floors. This isn't your fight." For a moment, Naomi felt her resolve falter. But then she remembered the night she had seen Richard Alden hunched over Alexander's computer, typing furiously while muttering numbers under his breath. She remembered the way he'd pocketed a USB drive and slipped out, his eyes darting like a thief's. Her voice was steady when she answered. "I saw what I saw, and one day soon, everyone else will too." Before Alexander could reply, the courtroom doors swung open, and Richard Alden himself entered with the grace of a man untouchable. His hair was perfectly combed back, his gray suit gleaming, his smile disarmingly warm. He clasped Alexander's shoulder as if in solidarity. "My boy," Richard said smoothly, "don't let this nonsense shake you. A servant's word holds no weight here." His eyes flicked briefly toward Naomi, a spark of disdain hidden beneath the charm. Naomi's stomach tightened. He was the devil in a silk tie, and no one could see it but her. The trial resumed, and Richard was called to testify. His voice was honeyed, his manner poised. He spoke of Alexander's recklessness, of late-night habits, of questionable transactions. He painted a picture of a spoiled heir, careless with money and responsibility. "He is brilliant," Richard said, eyes glistening with false sadness. "But brilliance can blind a man. I only wish I had noticed sooner, before this tragedy unfolded." Gasps spread through the gallery. The jury leaned forward, rapt. Alexander clenched his fists, his face red with fury. Naomi's chest burned. When the recess bell rang, Alexander erupted. "You liar!" he shouted, lunging forward until guards restrained him. The cameras captured it all, his rage, his lack of composure, his downfall written in every vein bulging at his temple. Outside the court, the headlines printed themselves. Harrington explodes as mentor testifies against him. That evening, Naomi returned to the staff quarters of the Harrington estate, her body weary but her mind ablaze. She found herself staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. Her mother's voice echoed again. The truth must never stay quiet. Her heart thudded as she whispered to her own reflection, "I won't let him get away with this." But what Naomi didn't know was that Richard Alden had already placed a call that night, his voice smooth as silk into the receiver. "She's becoming a problem. Silence her before she talks too much." And on the quiet street outside Naomi's modest room, a black sedan idled, its headlights off, watching. The wind whipped cold across the city that night, rattling the thin window pane in Naomi's quarters. She had fallen into a restless sleep when the crunch of gravel outside jolted her awake. Her heart pounded as she peered through the curtain. A dark sedan sat beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, its engine humming low. Her throat tightened. She knew. Naomi pulled her coat around her shoulders and slipped out the back door, walking quickly toward the staff exit of the Harrington estate. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, just a car, just a coincidence. But when she turned the corner, the sedan eased forward, matching her steps. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, clutching her bag to her chest. Inside the mansion, Alexander Harrington was nursing a glass of scotch in the library, his anger from the day still simmering. He stared at the headlines blaring across the television. Richard Alden, star witness seals billionaire's fate, each word pressed like a knife into his pride. He barely noticed the frantic knock on the door until the butler answered. Naomi stumbled in, breathless, her uniform wrinkled, her face pale with fear. "There's someone watching me," she gasped. I think Richard sent them." Alexander frowned, standing tall, his broad frame radiating irritation more than concern. "Do you have any idea how insane you sound? Richard has been family to me for years. He's not some criminal mastermind lurking in shadows." Naomi's eyes flashed. I saw him, Mr. Harrington. I saw him in your study that night, taking what he needed to frame you. He doesn't care about you. He cares about your empire, and now he's trying to scare me silent. For a fleeting second, Alexander's mask cracked. Doubt flickered in his eyes, but then his pride snapped it shut again. Even if what you're saying is true, what makes you think anyone will believe you? You're a maid, Naomi. You don't belong in a courtroom. People laugh when you open your mouth. Her chest ached. His words were cruel, but she had heard worse in her life. She had survived worse. Her mother cleaning houses until her hands bled, her father working night shifts no one remembered. She had inherited their resilience, not their silence. She stepped closer, her voice fierce and steady. Maybe they won't believe me. Maybe I'll get mocked, ridiculed, torn apart. But I will still stand, because I'd rather be laughed at for telling the truth than stay silent and let a lie destroy you. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he looked away. For the first time, he didn't have a retort. Suddenly, glass shattered in the hallway. Both of them spun toward the sound. A brick lay on the marble floor, shards glinting like ice around it. Wrapped around the brick was a folded slip of paper. Alexander picked it up, unrolling it with careful fingers. His face drained of color as he read the jagged scrawl. Stop her. Or next time, it's not glass. The silence between them was electric. For the first time, Alexander's arrogance slipped into fear. He looked at Naomi, who stood trembling but unbroken, her chin high. You were right, he muttered. He's not going to stop. Naomi nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Then neither can we. The following day, the trial resumed, and Naomi entered the courtroom not in her maid's uniform, but in a modest navy dress borrowed from a neighbor. Her posture was straighter, her steps steadier. She was no longer invisible. The prosecution attorney smirked as she was called to the stand. So, he drawled, circling her like a wolf. The maid wants to tell us a bedtime story. Go on, Miss Bennet. Entertain us. Laughter rippled in the gallery. Naomi clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, but her voice rang clear. I'm not he. We're to entertain you. I'm here to tell the truth. The attorney leaned in, sneering. And why should this court believe a word from someone like you? She met his eyes, unwavering. Because I was there. Because I have nothing to gain. And because sometimes the truth comes from the person you least expect. The room fell silent. Even Alexander, sitting stiffly at the defense table, found himself staring at her, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Respect, or something close to it. But from across the room, Richard Alden's smile never wavered. Only his eyes hardened, cold and calculating. Naomi had taken her stand, but Richard was ready to strike back. The air in the courtroom was suffocating. Naomi sat in the witness box, the bright lights hot against her skin. Across the aisle, Richard Alden leaned back in his chair with the smug ease of a man who had never been caught. His silver hair gleamed, his expression serene, but his eyes never left Naomi. They glittered like knives. Miss Bennet, the prosecutor pressed, his voice oily and condescending. You claim to have seen Mr. Alden, a respected philanthropist and businessman, sneaking into Mr. Harrington's study. At what time exactly? Naomi licked her lips, her hands twisting in her lap. It was past midnight. I had gone upstairs to leave fresh linens. Linens? The attorney interrupted with a smirk. Yes, of course, because billionaires are always calling for linens at midnight. The crowd chuckled. Naomi's chest burned, humiliation rising. She clenched her fists to keep her voice from breaking. I wasn't called. I was doing my duties. And when I passed by the study door, it was cracked open. I saw Mr. Alden inside, typing on Mr. Harrington's computer. The prosecutor raised his brows theatrically. So, you're suggesting that Mr. Alden, this trusted advisor, this man seated right here, secretly framed his lifelong partner, and you, of all people, just happened to witness it? Yes, Naomi said firmly, though her throat was tight. The lawyer chuckles. Ed, shaking his head. Ladies and gentlemen, are we truly to believe that a maid, a servant whose entire livelihood depends on Mr. Harrington's charity, is suddenly the star witness? How convenient. How desperate. Naomi's cheeks burned. Her pulse hammered so loudly she could barely hear the murmurs of the jury. She wanted to shrink, to vanish. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Alexander Harrington. He was watching her intently, no longer sneering, no longer dismissive. His jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. She straightened her back. Her mother's voice whispered inside her, "Truth is heavy, but you were born strong enough to carry it." Naomi met the prosecutor's smirk with steady eyes. "It's not convenient. It's not desperate. It's the truth. I know what I saw, and no amount of mocking me will change that." The prosecutor blinked, momentarily thrown off. Before he could recover, Alexander's lawyer rose for redirect. "Miss Bennett," he said, softer, almost protective, "did you see anything else that night?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Mr. Alden had something in his hand when he left, a flash drive. He slipped it into his pocket before shutting the study door." For the first time, Richard's mask faltered. His smile twitched just slightly before sliding back into place. The defense attorney caught it. "No further questions." Whispers spread across the room. The judge called for recess, his gavel echoing like thunder. Naomi stepped down from the witness box, her legs trembling, her body screaming for air. In the corridor, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions, shoving microphones at her face. She pushed through, nearly stumbling, until a strong hand steadied her. Alexander. For once, his icy demeanor was gone. He looked at her with something she had never seen before, uncertain gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he muttered. His voice was low, almost raw. Naomi met his gaze, her own eyes tired but unwavering. "Yes, I did. Because no one else will." For a long moment they stood in the chaos, two people from opposite worlds tethered by a fragile thread of truth. But across the courthouse, in a private chamber, Richard Alden was seething. His hands shook as he poured a drink, his smile nowhere to be seen. The maid had not only spoken, she had gotten under his skin. "Fine," he whispered to himself, staring at his reflection in the glass. "If she wants war, she'll have it." The storm had broken. The battle lines were drawn. And as the court reconvened, the weight of Naomi's courage shifted everything. For the first time, the jury wasn't certain Alexander Harrington was guilty. For the first time, Richard Alden wasn't untouchable. The courthouse buzzed like a hornet's nest the next morning. Word of Naomi's testimony had spread across the city, and for the first time since the trial began, the public narrative shifted. Could Harrington be innocent? One newspaper headline blared. Servant becomes star witness, another mocked. Talk show hosts debated Naomi's credibility. Was she brave or delusional? Naomi walked up the marble courthouse steps with her shoulders squared, though her stomach turned from the flashing cameras. She had borrowed the same navy dress, but this time she added a simple silver necklace her mother once wore. It was her armor, her reminder of where she came from. Inside, Alexander Harrington stood at the defense table, staring at her as she entered. His suit was pristine as always, his posture stiff, but his eyes softer, humbled. She could tell he hadn't slept. When court came to order, Richard Alden took the stand again. His tone was sharp now, his smile strained. He attempted to dismiss Naomi's testimony as fantasy, painting her as a desperate girl seeking attention. "Your Honor, the notion that this maid just happened to stumble upon a decades-long business partner plotting embezzle me is not only absurd, it's insulting to this court's intelligence," Richard said, gesturing with his ringed hand. "Miss Bennett is, at best, mistaken. At worst, she is being manipulated." Naomi sat rigid, her fists clenched in her lap. The jury murmured uneasily. But then Alexander's lawyer rose. He carried a manila folder and a grim expression. "Mr. Alden," he said smoothly, "we subpoenaed Harrington Enterprises' security logs from the night in question. According to these records, your access card was used to enter the Harrington estate at 12:47 a.m. The courtroom gasped. Richard's mask cracked again, only for a split second. But it was enough. His jaw flexed, his nostrils flared. Then he leaned forward, composed once more. "Impossible," he said coolly. "Someone must have cloned my card. Clearly the defense is desperate." The jury shifted uneasily again. The balance teetered like a fragile scale. Suddenly, Alexander rose from his seat, his voice booming across the room. "Stop lying, Richard!" His blue eyes burned, but this time not with arrogance, with desperation. He slammed his palm against the defense table, his composure unraveling. "You betrayed me. You were in that study because you wanted my empire, and you—" "Mr. Harrington!" the judge barked, hammering his gavel. "Sit down or I'll have you removed." The courtroom broke into chaos, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing. Alexander sank back down, his chest heaving, his face pale with fury. The jury's eyes were wide, their perception shifting. This wasn't the tantrum of an entitled heir. It was the raw fury of a man who had finally realized he'd been stabbed in the back. Naomi, watching him, felt something stir in her chest. For the first time, she didn't see the cold billionaire who insulted her. She saw a man unraveling, stripped bare of power, broken by betrayal. During recess, Naomi found on him in the hallway, leaning against the wall, his tie loosened, his head bowed. "You believe me now," she said softly. Alexander lifted his eyes to her. The arrogance was gone. His voice was hoarse. "I don't just believe you. I need you." The words stunned them both. Alexander, who had mocked her, dismissed her, humiliated her, now spoke with naked vulnerability. Naomi's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Then let's finish this. Together." Back in the courtroom, as proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. The jury no longer looked at Naomi as just a maid. They looked at her as a woman who stood her ground in the face of scorn. They looked at Alexander as a man fighting not just for his freedom, but for his dignity. And for the first time, Richard Alden looked cornered. His hands trembled as he adjusted his tie. His perfect smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The empire he had so carefully built on lies was beginning to crack. By the end of the day, the jury whispered in nervous tones, the gallery buzzed with speculation, and Alexander Harrington, once scornful, once untouchable, looked across the courtroom at Naomi with something close to reverence. The tide was turning, and Richard Alden knew it. The courtroom was electric. Reporters filled every seat, cameras waited like vultures outside, and the air itself felt heavy, as though everyone present knew this day would decide the fate of Alexander Harrington. Richard Alden took the stand once more. His silver hair gleamed under the lights, his cufflinks catching the glow, but his composure was fraying at the edges. He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief as he began, his voice less smooth than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've dedicated 30 years to the Harrington family. I would never, never betray them. These accusations are the desperate lies of a frightened servant and a spoiled man who refuses to accept responsibility for his own mistakes." Naomi sat at the defense table beside Alexander, her fingers twisting too, his silver necklace at her throat. Her pulse thudded as she watched the jury. Some frowned, some nodded uncertainly. Richard still had them. His veneer of respectability was strong. The defense attorney rose. "Mr. Alden, could you explain why, if you never betrayed the Harringtons, your access card was logged entering Mr. Harrington's study at 12:47 a.m.? Richard's smile flickered. "As I've said, someone must have cloned my card." "And can you explain why?" the attorney continued, pulling a sheet of paper from his folder. "This email, retrieved from your personal server, was sent from your account at 12:58 a.m. to a shell corporation later linked to the missing funds?" The courtroom erupted. Richard's face drained of color. His lips parted, then pressed shut, his eyes darting toward the jury. "That's fabricated!" he snapped, his voice cracking. "This is harassment!" But the jurors leaned forward, their skepticism plain. For the first time, Naomi saw it, Richard losing his grip. Alexander stood suddenly, his voice trembling with fury. "Tell them the truth, Richard! After everything, after my father trusted you like a brother, tell them you did this!" The judge banged the gavel, but the room was no longer under his control. All eyes were on Richard Alden. Richard's composure shattered, his voice rose, jagged, desperate. "Why shouldn't I have done it?" he spat, his hands shaking. "Why should Harringtons always sit at the top while the rest of us serve? I built that empire with your father, me, and what did I get? A paycheck and a pat on the head while you lived like a king?" Gasps filled the courtroom. The mask was gone. The venom poured freely now. Richard's face twisted, his voice breaking into a roar. "You don't deserve any of it. You're a spoiled child with more money than sense. I was smarter, I was better, and yet I was the servant." The irony of the word struck like lightning. Every head turned toward Naomi, who sat upright, her eyes unflinching. For a heartbeat, silence ruled. Then Richard slumped back in his chair, his chest heaving, sweat beading down his temple. The jury stared at him in horror. The bailiff stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I think we've heard enough." The judge's voice thundered. "Mr. Alden, you have incriminated yourself beyond doubt. You are hereby placed under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and perjury." The gavel slammed. Guards seized Richard's arms. He struggled, his polished shoes scraping the floor, but it was over. His empire, his mask, his lies, all crumbled in the span of minutes. Naomi exhaled shakily, her whole body trembling. Alexander turned to her, his face pale, his eyes glassy. He lowered his head, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I was wrong about you, about everything." In front of the silent courtroom, Alexander Harrington, the billionaire heir who once looked down on everyone, bowed his head toward Naomi Bennett, the maid he had mocked, the woman who had saved him. Tears stung Naomi's eyes, but she did not falter. She placed a steady hand on his arm. "Stand tall, Mr. Harrington," she said softly. "The truth set you free. Don't forget who gave it breath." The entire courtroom sat frozen, the image seared into memory. The powerful man bent low, and the invisible maid rising higher than anyone expected. The verdict was delivered the following morning. The jury filed in, their faces solemn, their decision sealed. "On the charge of fraud and embezzlement," the foreman declared, "we find the defendant, Alexander Harrington, not guilty." The words echoed through the chamber like a bell toll. For the first time in weeks, Alexander breathed freely. His broad shoulders sagged as though years of weight had lifted. He turned toward Naomi instinctively, as though she were the anchor that had kept him from drowning. Naomi didn't smile. She sat with her hands clasped in her lap, her yes, lowered, quiet and steady. Vindication was his, but dignity was hers. The judge's gavel cracked. "This court is adjourned." Outside, the courthouse steps were a sea of flashing cameras and shouting voices. Alexander stepped into the chaos with Naomi at his side. Reporters surged forward, demanding answers, shoving microphones toward them. "Mr. Harrington, how does it feel to be acquitted? Do you have anything to say about Richard Alden's betrayal? Miss Bennett, why did you risk everything for him?" Naomi's throat tightened, but before she could speak, Alexander raised a hand. The crowd hushed. "This woman," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, "saved me, not just from prison, but from myself." His blue eyes swept across the crowd. "I insulted her, mocked her. I thought her invisible. But when the world turned against me, she stood alone and spoke the truth. I owe her my freedom, my life, and my respect, and I will spend the rest of my days proving I deserve it." Gasps rippled through the press. The arrogant heir, the spoiled billionaire, bowing before a maid. It was a story no one could have written. Naomi felt her chest tighten. His words carried the weight of sincerity, but she wasn't fooled by grand gestures. She leaned toward the microphones, her voice clear, strong. "I didn't save Mr. Harrington because of who he is," she said steadily. "I saved him because it was right. The truth matters, even if it comes from a maid, especially then." The silence that followed was profound. Even the most jaded reporters lowered their cameras slightly. In the weeks that followed, Richard Alden's empire collapsed. His charities were revealed as shells, his companies riddled with corruption. He was sentenced to prison, his name dragged from marble to mud. Alexander retreated from the public eye. He sold his penthouse, scaled back his companies, and began quietly fun. Ding scholarships for working-class families, the kind his own fortune had once overlooked. At every step, Naomi's voice echoed in his decisions. As for Naomi Bennett, she left her maid's uniform folded neatly on her bed at the estate. She walked away not with bitterness, but with pride. She began studying law at night, determined to become the advocate she wished she'd had when the world mocked her on the stand. On the last day before she left the Harrington estate for good, Alexander stood at the gates. No suit, no cufflinks, just a man in a plain shirt, his hands uncertain at his sides. "Naomi," he said softly, his voice stripped of all arrogance. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know, I see you now. Truly." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. She thought of all the times he had mocked her, all the times she clenched her fists in silence. And then she thought of the courtroom, of the moment he bowed his head and let the world see his shame. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Then keep seeing, Mr. Harrington. Don't ever forget what it took. She turned and walked down the road, her figure straight and unyielding against the setting sun. Alexander watched her go, a quiet vow rising in his chest. He would never be the man he had been before she spoke those words. Stop the trial. He's innocent. And Naomi? She walked forward into her own story, no longer invisible, her truth forever echoing louder than wealth or power. The curtain fell there, on dignity, on redemption, on the fragile but enduring power of one voice that dared to rise.